All right. So with domain, what you're going to do is you always say that it's all real numbers. Bless you. Okay? And you're going to take what's in the denominator and you're going to set it equal to 0. Okay, remember, our denominator can't have a 0 there because otherwise it would be undefined, right? Because like 1 divided by 0 gives me an undefined answer. So we're going to say all real numbers, which is negative infinity to positive infinity, where x cannot equal 0. That's our whole entire answer, right? With me so far? Okay. On number 2, if we could factor this, we would, but since we can't, we won't. So all we're going to do is we're going to take what's in the denominator, and we're going to set it equal to 0, and we're going to solve. So that's going to give me 2x equals 7. And we're going to divide by 2 on both sides. So x is going to equal 7/2 or 3.5, right? Those are the same things. So for our domain, we have all real numbers except where 3.5 is. All right, so what we're going to do, all right, we're going to factor the top and we're going to factor the bottom. However, in this one, it's just asking for the domain in the bottom. So we're going to factor the bottom really quickly, which is going to be a times c, which is -3, and b, which is 2. What two numbers will make that happen? 3 and -1. Yep. Okay. So we're going to take both of those, and we're going to put them in factored form. That's going to be x plus 3 and x minus 1. We're going to set both of those equal to 0, and we're going to solve. And so x cannot equal 1, and x cannot equal -3. But we've got all real numbers otherwise. Look at that handwriting. Okay, so we've got real numbers for which a rational function is not defined are called excluded or restricted values. Okay, so that's what we did in that domain on the last 3 problems. Okay, so for vertical asymptotes, what we're going to do is we're going to take what's in the denominator and is not a factor in the numerator. That's really important. And that's going to be our vertical asymptote. So just like what we did on problems 1, 2, and 3, we said, hey, you can't have something at x equals 3 because it's in the denominator. Okay? We're going to see that in just 1 second. This horizontal asymptote, we're going to focus on these exponents right here and here. Do you see how this says in the top and it says im in the bottom? Yes, no, maybe. Okay? That's what it's talking about here, here, and here. Okay? So if the exponent in the top is less than the exponent in the bottom, then you're going to have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. If your exponents are the same, so if they're same, then you're going to take your coefficients and put them over each other. And if your numerator's exponent is bigger than the one in the denominator, then there's going to be no horizontal asymptote. I would suggest writing down. So in this first example, okay, it says we're going to identify the vertical and horizontal asymptotes. So we're going to identify the vertical and the horizontal asymptotes. So for the vertical asymptote, in order to do this, we have to factor what's in the bottom. Okay? So if we factor what's in the bottom, we're going to say a times c, that's going to give us -3. And our b value is going to be -2. What two numbers will make that happen? -3 and +1, right? So I could rewrite this denominator as x minus 3 times x plus 1. So what are my vertical asymptotes going to be? X equals 3 and x equals 1. So in order for us to find our horizontal asymptotes, what we're going to do is we're going to use these rules up here. Best way to learn these rules is to A, either memorize them, or B, use them in practice. I would suggest C, do both of those things, right? Okay, so with that being said, we're going to look at those exponents. We've got 1 in the top and 2 in the bottom. So that means that my numerator is going to have less than my denominator, which means I'm going to have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. So one thing somebody just brought up is that this should be -1 because we should change that sign when we solve. So I apologize for that. But on number 5, what's going to happen is if we could factor the top and the bottom, we would. But since we can't, we won't. So in order to figure out what your vertical asymptote is, you're going to take what's in the denominator and you're going to set it equal to 0 and you're going to solve. So x is going to equal -1. Okay? If you're trying to figure out what your horizontal asymptote is, what you're going to do is you're going to use these 3 rules. So we've got a 2 in the exponent in the top and a 1 in the exponent in the bottom. So since the exponent in the top is bigger, there's going to be no horizontal asymptote. So we're going to write none. So the next concept that we need to learn is something called a whole. Okay. So when you factor the top and the bottom, sometimes you have something cancel out, right? Okay, so when you're able, nah, it's cool, it's fine, I'm not trying to help you. Okay, so if you're trying to cancel something out in the top and the bottom, that's going to be one of your wholes. Okay, so if we rewrite number 6 in the top, we're trying to get rid of that negative out front. So I'm going to switch all of my signs to make it easier on myself. So this is going to be x squared plus 2x minus 3 over x squared plus x minus 2. Okay, so really quickly, all I did was I switched the signs of everything in the top. Okay, so now I'm going to factor what's in the top and what's in the bottom. So if I factor the top, I'm going to get a times c, that's going to give me -3. And b is going to give me 2. So what 2 numbers will make that happen? 3 and -1, right? Okay. So that top can be rewritten as x plus 3 times x minus 1, right? In the bottom, we're going to factor. So that's going to be a times c. That's going to give me -2. What's my b value? 1. What 2 numbers will make that happen? 2 and -1, right? So this will be x plus 2 times x minus 1. All right, so here's the important part. We want to identify all the asymptotes, and we want to identify the wholes. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to notice is that you can cancel stuff out in the top and the bottom, right? This x minus 1, you can cancel it out in the top and the bottom. That's going to be your whole for this guy. So this is going to be x equals 1. Okay? A whole is something you cancel out. Okay? For that vertical asymptote, do you see how we have that x plus 2 left in the denominator? Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set that equal to 0, and we're going to solve. We're going to get x equals -2. If we're trying to figure out what our horizontal asymptote is, we're going to look at the exponents. Our exponents are the same. So our rule is take the coefficients of the leading term and divide them both. So in this top part, we've got -1. In this bottom part, we've got 1. What's -1 divided by 1? -1, right? Okay. You must write out asymptotes as an equation. What I mean by that is you should have x equals something or y equals something.
So basically, whatever choice is maximum,
all right, so if you graph this equation, this is what it should look like. Okay, so I graphed this guy right here just to make my life a little bit easier. Okay, so it should look like this. Okay, what you're going to notice is that there's going to be a vertical asymptote at x equals -2. Okay, so right in here. And you've got a horizontal asymptote at y equals -1. Okay, as well as you've got a whole at x equals 1. So what I mean by that is if you type second graph into your calculator, you're going to see the table. You're not going to see the whole in your graph. You're going to see it in the table. So look at when x equals 1. There should be an error at x equals 1. All right, so if I'm going to factor this, I'm going to do the top first, which is going to be a times c. That's going to give me negative 15. And b is going to give me 2. What two numbers will make that happen?
Negative 3 and 5.
Negative 3 and 5. So this is going to be x plus 5 in the top times x minus 3. And then in the bottom, I'm going to factor this over here. So a times c is going to give me negative 3. B is going to give me negative 2. What two numbers will make that happen? Negative 3 and positive 1, right? So this will be x plus 1 times x minus 3. Yes, you can write it the other way if you want. And now we're going to figure out what our vertical asymptote,
They cancel out.
horizontal, and whole. Okay, so for our whole, that's the one that we cancel out, right? So this x minus 3, if we solve, we're going to get x equals 3, right? Positive 3. For our vertical asymptote, we're going to take what's in the bottom that's left over. We're going to set it equal to 0 and solve. So that's going to be x equals negative 1. Okay? And if for those of you who didn't see that, you're taking this. That gets you the vertical asymptote. If you take what we cancel out, that gives you your whole. And for your horizontal asymptote, what you're going to do is you're going to look at your exponents. If your exponents are the same, we're going to take the coefficients. So what's 1 divided by 1? So that's going to be y equals 1. Just to make sure that you understand where these asymptotes are coming from, that vertical asymptote is at x equals negative 1. So that's, guys, right in here. Wow, look at that line. That horizontal asymptote is going to be at y equals 1. That's, guy, is in here. And there's going to be a whole at x equals 3. So that's going to be right in here. There's going to be an error. But you got to look at your table in order to see that error. So you're going to hit second graph. That's going to pull up an error at x equals 3. Okay? On number 8, what's going to happen is we've got to factor by grouping. Factor. Nope. Just kidding. Don't like that. Factor by grouping. So, like, if you don't understand this, I would be YouTubing it tonight. So, what I've got in these first two terms, I'm going to put parentheses around them. What do they both have in common?
T.
A t squared, right? Okay, so we're going to take t cubed and divide it by t squared, and that's going to give us t, right?
Yeah.
Negative t squared divided by t squared is going to give us negative 1. Okay, so all I've done so far is I've taken these first two terms, and I said, what do they have in common? That t squared. Now let me divide it out. Okay?
Wait.
What I'm going to do with these next two terms is I'm going to say, all right, what do these two terms have in common? Not just 4, they're going to have negative 4 because we want to get rid of that negative out of that first term. So we're going to divide by a negative 4. So what's negative 4t divided by negative 4? 1t. 4 divided by negative 4 is going to give me negative 1. So now that we've gotten here, what we're going to do is we're going to cancel out one of these parentheses because do you see how it repeats? And then we're going to rewrite what's in the other parentheses. And anything that's left out, that's not crossed out, we're going to squish it together and write it in its own parentheses. Factor t squared minus 4. Yes, you can factor this. So this is going to become t plus 2 times t minus 2. Okay? So I can rewrite what's in the top as t minus 1 times t plus 2 times t minus 2. And that's just the numerator. Okay? What's in the denominator is we're going to factor this guy right here. Okay, so when we do that, we're going to get t plus 2 times t minus 1. So we factored what's in that denominator. And that's how we got this down here. Love it. Okay? All right, so now we actually have to do what we were assigned to do. So that vertical asymptote, horizontal asymptote, and wholes. Remember, our wholes are the things that we can cancel out. So look at what's going to happen. I'm going to have t equals negative 2. Ooh, look at that handwriting. Okay? I'm also going to have t equals 1, because those will cancel out.